Hi, you're listening to She Shield, your one-stop podcast for all topics personal safety. I'm your host, Sofia, and my goal is to help educate women and men on concealed carry, martial arts, and all topics self-defense. This episode is brought to you by Big Tex Ordnance, your soon-to-be favorite retailer for all of your firearms needs. BTO believes in only selling high-quality gear for responsibly armed citizens, as well as providing pre- and post-sale support. BTO values firearms training and supports firearms instructors nationwide. They even pay for their own staff to train with high-level instructors to ensure that when you as the consumer reach out, you are taken care of. Today, we have Sherri Thomson and Steve Moses on the podcast, or I guess I should say Detective Sherri Thomson. Would that be more correct?
That's fine.
I'm really glad I asked you before the episode started. But I'm so happy you both are here. I would love for you to go ahead and introduce yourselves to the podcast in any manner you would like to do so.
Hi, Sofia. Thanks for inviting us. My name is Steve Moses. I'm a longtime firearms trainer. I do customer support for the Firearm Trainers Association. I'm also a content creator for them, as well as CCW Safe. I've been pretty much involved in this business since 1993. I have multiple instructor certifications, including Range Master, Master Firearms Instructor. I'm also a Texas Level 4 Licensed Personal Protection Officer Instructor. That means I'm licensed to do executive protection in the state of Texas and also function as an instructor. Myself, Alan McBee, and Guy Schnitzler, we own a company called Palisade Training Group. We've been training in one form or the other. The primary course that we're somewhat known for is church security team instructor leader development courses, although we do a number of other courses and everything. I've got a number of instructor certifications, such as OC instructor, force on force, active shooter, empty head knife defense, tactical anatomy instructor. Trying to think. I've got a few more anyway. I really feel like a lot of those instructor certifications just help us teach some of our base courses a little bit better, as opposed to we feel like we're capable of teaching a full-blown course in each of those disciplines. Understand that you're also We're talking to martial artists about martial arts, so I do have a martial arts background. I earned a black belt in Taekwondo back in the 80s, back when we routinely put each other in the hospital. And I'm a Helson Gracie Jiu-Jitsu brown belt. So been doing this a long time. I'm really excited to be on that. And I'm really even more excited to bring Sherri on board, because I think the subject that she's going to address today is really going to resonate with your listeners. And it's one that I had always had some concern about, but almost a detached, empathy for what was going on. And I learned from Sherri at a Better Beginnings bruncheon that was sponsored by Cross Timbers Family Services in Stephenville, Texas. It was a panel in which they discussed human trafficking. I went there, I was interested, and I left not only more than interested, but very much concerned when I found out that human trafficking was not something that was primarily a problem, in third world countries. It is an enormous problem here in the United States. And a lot of people that we thought would not be victims or targets of human traffickers, they actually are, which caused me some concern when I realized that I had family members, granddaughters, etc., that might be targeted. And so once I learned that, I learned much of that from Sherri. I got on to Sherri and I badgered her. And I badgered her and I badgered her, and she eventually consented to do a podcast. We did that first podcast with Brian Easter's Off Duty, On Duty podcast. And so I'm very, very pleased to be here today, and I turn it over to Sherri.
Hi, Sofia. Hi, Steve. My name is Sherri Thomson. I retired out of the city of Fort Worth, an excellent police department. If anybody out there is interested in being a police officer, I spent 28 and a half years there. I don't have a single complaint. They're a very good police department and a great city to work for. I retired out of human trafficking and sex crimes. I was a detective for 14 years, a patrol officer for 14 years. And my specialty in criminal investigations was sex crimes and human trafficking. And later in my career, I went back to supervise that unit, and which then included sex offender unit. So my experience is in personal violent crimes. I don't have a lot of experience in property crimes. When I came out to Tarleton after I retired for about 18 months, now I work every case out here. I'm the only one out here, so I have a little bit of everything. It's a busy campus. It's a great campus. At Stephenville PD is why I stay. The DA's office is why I stay. The county, I would put any of these people up against Fort Worth any day. They just work out here because they're from here or they want to raise their kids out here. It's a great place to work, though. So if anybody's interested in Stephenville or Tarleton or Fort Worth, I'm the one to call. I'll fill you in. And the DA's office, they're just phenomenal to work for. So those are why I stay. It's a busy campus. I guess I should first start with, if I say HT, it's because that's short for human trafficking. There are two kinds. I actually only specialize in sex trafficking. I have worked a few labor trafficking cases, but that's not my area of expertise. I'm well-rounded, but in the realm of sex crimes. So a lot of people don't understand human trafficking, and I promise you by the time we finish today, you will. Everybody's confusion or cloud or misunderstandings will be cleared up. We'll talk about some definitions, some legal definitions, what human trafficking requires from a criminal standpoint, and then some court cases that kind of shore it up. The actual definition of human trafficking is if you compel a person by using force, fraud, or coercion, and we'll define those three terms that the law needs. So if you compel the person by using those elements, force, fraud, coercion, to get them to exchange sexual favors, to engage in sexual favors with another person while you profit, you are a human trafficker. So basically, you can't make someone have sex with someone else while you take the money, which is a really important lead-in into the difference between pimp and trafficker and victim and prostitute. And we'll get to that in a minute. So that's pretty much human trafficking. If I make you have sex with someone else and I keep the money, I'm a trafficker. There's a lot of things that go into that. Human trafficking, fortunately, is a federal crime. So if a detective or a police agency has a choice of sexual assault or human trafficking, they would always want to try for the human trafficking because you get more time in a federal sentence. If you get 20 years, you do 20 years. And so that's the difference. Human trafficking is actually a federal crime. It's not a state crime like sexual assault is. Does that make sense?
It does. I did not know that.
Mm-hmm. And my victims are primarily female, but so I might say she, but they're very, very interchangeable. I've worked a lot of cases where males were the victims, but just for simplicity, usually I will say she if I'm referring to my victim.
Understood.
Do you have any particular questions that you'd like me to clear up right away?
So there's something you said before, our pre-show discussion, and that's the difference between human trafficking and sexual assault. Since you went ahead and defined human trafficking, would you please define sexual assault?
Sexual assault is forcing someone by various elements to engage in sexual activity by force, lack of consent. There's several different kinds of rapes. they are, but the gist of sexual assault is you cannot compel someone to have sex. You can't do anything to make them believe they have no choice. You can't threaten them. You can't hold a weapon to them. You can't choke them. You can't force them in any way. They have to, for it to be legal, they have to consent, or they have to believe that they have a choice. And that's rape, which we'll talk about when we're done with human trafficking. I'm guessing that's when we'll get to that.
That sounds
I don't
perfect.
want to confuse and do them at the same time, because I think
Right.
people will easily get confused.
Understood. Yes. Thank you for defining them.
As far as human trafficking, and I say human trafficking, but I'm meaning sex trafficking. We wish they hadn't named it trafficking, because that misleads people. The reason they named it human trafficking is misleading, but the word trafficking causes people to think there has to be movement, that you have to move from one place to another, and that's the big misunderstanding with the public, is you don't. The word trafficking in its literal sense means, in sexual assault and human trafficking, it means that humans are so reusable that the crime itself is in constant motion. So that's the trafficking part of human trafficking. It has nothing to do with an 18-wheeler or movement from one place to the other, like smuggling crimes do. You can be a trafficking victim and never leave your own home. And that always gets people, because they don't understand that. But they will when I'm done. They will completely understand that.
Wonderful.
So what the law needs to prove up human trafficking is fraud, force, or coercion. So force is easy. You can't profit off of making someone have sex with someone else by using force. That's a weapon, threats. Those are easily proved, of the other two elements.
Okay.
Fraud, in the human trafficking sense, we don't see a lot, actually. And we suspect it's because the human trafficking victims that are victims by fraud, by that fraud element, as opposed to the force element, we don't think that they are able to escape their situation. So that's why we feel we don't have a lot of fraud in the human trafficking sense. So fraud is the nanny or the model that everybody's heard about. You show up, you think you're being hired as a nanny or a model, and you are immediately thrust into a human trafficking situation with no way to escape. So the fraud element in human trafficking we see with a lot of international students, or people coming in from other countries, or the person who literally believes she's going for an interview for a model or a nanny type job and didn't tell anyone where she is, didn't have kind of a backup plan. And that's where she shows up and gets immediately thrust into the situation. That's what human trafficking calls fraud. Most people think fraud is a banking crime,
Yes.
a money crime. But in the human trafficking sense, that's what that is. Coercion is the most difficult for people to understand. Coercion is a duress element. It's a common element in human trafficking. It's just difficult for people to grasp, because duress and coercion, they're exploitation type elements. And so coercion is the act of instilling fear into someone in order to compel them to have sex with someone else while you profit. So this right here will clear this up. An example of coercion is a case that we had. A guy convinced his neighbor, who was a single mother, that if she didn't have sex with men in the apartment complex while he profited, he would turn her in to CPS for abusing her children, and she wasn't abusing them. He exploited her fear of government agencies, CPS, and her fear of losing her children. She had just come off of a nasty divorce, so she also had a distrust of the court system. So he was very patient, like traffickers are. I've told Steve numerous times, they're the most patient criminals in the world. They will work for months to groom someone into trafficking because it will financially benefit them for years. So that's how you get coercion. He found her weakness, and that's what he preyed on. And that makes it coercion. If she really was abusing the kids, it wouldn't be coercion in the human trafficking sense, but she wasn't. So he manipulated that, and to the degree that it became coercion. So do you understand the coercion element?
Yes, ma'am.
It's kind of instilling fear.
Yes, I do.
Does that make sense?
It does. Thank you.
So those are the elements that we need to prove up a case unless the victim is a minor. You don't need any of those elements. If you traffic a minor, you traffic a minor.
I see.
So
okay.
If they're an adult, those are the one of those elements has to exist for us to file a human trafficking charge. A lot of questions that I get, and people assume that pimp and trafficker are the same thing. I think Steve did for a while. He assumed pimp and trafficker and prostitute and trafficking victim are the same thing, but they're not. A lot of people think that. They'll tell me, oh, you mean a trafficker? Oh, he's a pimp. There's a really big difference.
Okay.
And to find the difference, you have to look at the element of control going on. So if the prostitute is free to walk away from her situation without fear of death or injury, her children being injured, threatened, any of those elements, if she's free to walk away, she is a prostitute. Now, she may feel that she has no control in her situation, whether it's lack of education or abusive background, no support system, no other means, no life skills, no means to make a living. She might feel like she has no choice. But legally, if she has the choice of walking away without those fears, she's a prostitute. A victim would have those fears and wouldn't be free to walk away. Does that make sense?
It does, yes.
The trafficker and the pimp, they both are similar in that they run a business for profit. And both are in it for the money. But that control element is very, very important. And it's what we have to prove to legally show the difference in human trafficking and prostitution. Does that make sense? That kind of does tend to make people think, okay, all my life I've thought they're the same. Now they know what to look for.
Absolutely.
And Sherri, sometimes it's fairly subtle. I believe we discussed maybe some things that took place, maybe even out at Tarleton, where you would have a young co-ed kind of maybe came from perhaps a bad bad home life, didn't have good family support, didn't have a lot of friends, that would be courted, if you will, by a male, and then basically groomed, maybe would even induce her to start taking some drugs, and then threaten her that he would turn her over to the campus because of her, using drugs if she did not have sex with men and boys. Well, I'll just say men that he provided. That's accurate, isn't it, Sherri?
It's true. The trafficker likes the college campus, most college campuses, because he has a large pool of victims to choose from in a small area. So the trafficker will tend to seek out the student who has no support system. No one checks on her. She has no money, an abusive background she escaped, wants to be popular, wants to fit in, the shy, the quiet one. We all know somebody like that. All of us. Those are the ones that he will tend to select and spend those months grooming. And like Steve said, one of the ways he'll groom is he'll become her boyfriend, sometimes friend, but most often boyfriend. It'll start out very normal. He'll pay a couple of her bills, so she's indebted. And then a few months later, it'll suddenly become, well, I've done everything in this relationship. It's your turn. What can you do? Well, generally she has no money or job. So he says, okay, tomorrow I'll bring a guy over. you have sex with him. That'll be your way to financially participate in this relationship. Now, keep in mind, this girl has no one else. So that generally is how it starts. Then when she resists or protests, he'll generally say something like, I'll turn you in. I'll either drive you back to your abusive home, or I'll turn you in and get you kicked out of the school. Which isn't true, but that's one of those coercion elements. He'll convince her that she has nothing else. So then before you know it, 2, 3, 4 months later, he's bringing guys on a daily basis. And she is completely entrenched into the human trafficking cycle. That's how a guy would seek out a college student. It's same for high school. It's a tough crime to stop on a college campus because a lot of those girls don't report it. And we'll get to why it's so difficult to get a victim to cooperate with the police. But that's how a college case generally starts from what I've seen. One example of human trafficking, and remember, minors, you don't need any of those elements. And that shocks everybody more than any other case I've had. This one tends to shock everybody the most, but it also clears up any and all confusion about what human trafficking actually is. So a mom and a dad allowed men to come into their home, and they charged $80 for the men to have sex with their 5-year-old and $50 for men to have sex with their 8-year-old. They are human traffickers. The kids have no choice, and they are profiting off of selling their kids for money. So, remember, in that case, you wouldn't need the fraud, force, or coercion. Just the simple act of selling kids for sex is human trafficking. So a lot of people don't understand you can be a human trafficking victim without ever walking out of your front door. Yeah, that's always a tough case because a lot of people listening will say, oh, I didn't realize that was human trafficking. And remember, that's the federal charge, so you'd want to work it as that rather than a state charge. It can be 3 or 4 different charges, but it's human trafficking to do that. So you'd want to pursue that charge because you'll get generally more time, more day-for-day time in your prison sentence.
Understood.
So that case always gets people. The one that Steve likes the best because it really clears up human trafficking and the difference between Sofia. This case will clear up any confusion anybody has about human trafficking and sex crimes, a sexual assault. And before we get to that one, I do want to say there are high risk. Everybody's at risk, but there are high risk factors that people can look for. And so some of the high risk factors is abrupt personality change in someone that you see often, someone with a lot of sudden STDs, multiple pregnancies, if a lot of abdominal pain, and a lot of people can recognize human trafficking in people they know. You know, they won't be as apt to see these changes in somebody at 7-Eleven. But if it's a niece that they see 3, 4, 5, 6 times a year, these are high risk signs. It doesn't mean they're being trafficked. It doesn't mean you go beat up their boyfriend, but you might want to take pause and just kind of find out what is going on. It could be they're being trafficked, like that college girl I told you about, where they're ashamed because they feel like they've participated. And in reality, they're victims of human trafficking by coercion. They've been basically tricked or misled into that crime. So that's kind of some of the things to look for. So the case that Steve likes the best is what we call Denny's. This girl, 17, so we didn't have the minor factor there. She met a guy on a dating app. I don't even guess it matters which one, but there's so many
Tinder.
out there now. She did. What's sad about this case is she did everything she was supposed to do. She told her mom where she was going, and she drove herself. It's a very public, busy restaurant. So they have their meal. They're finishing up, and he jabbed her under the table with a needle. The next thing she knew, when she regained consciousness, she was in a motel in Louisiana. Yeah. Over the course of the weekend, and I always tell Steve, if it wasn't for the motel video, I wouldn't actually believe the sheer number of men. But over the course of that weekend, he brought 40 men into that hotel room to have sex with her while he profited. He, in this case, did not have sex with her. He's the trafficker. If he had engaged in sex with her, this girl was obviously unable to consent. She was in and out of consciousness. So if he had raped her, he would be a sexual assault suspect, but he's the trafficker. That's the federal charge. So that's the one you would want to go with. The men that he brought into that room are not traffickers. They didn't profit. They committed the act of sexual assault. They had sex with a girl they knew couldn't consent, and they knew she was being forced. So that is the difference. That case always clears up the difference between rape and human trafficking. Does that make sense?
Are you in search of top-notch gear that exceeds your expectations? Look no further than GPS, brought to you by Go Outdoors Incorporated. GPS has been dedicated to crafting the finest products for hunting and shooting since 2002. As someone who frequents the gun range, my GPS bag is a staple to safely and effectively haul my gear. Their specialized bags are designed to keep all of my valuable equipment secure and organized. With GPS, you can experience the ultimate peace of mind. There are 3 exciting product lines: GPS Tactical, GPS Wild About Hunting, and GPS Wild About Shooting provide the perfect solution for your specific needs. So whether you're on a hunting expedition or hitting the range, GPS is your reliable companion. To choose a bag that fits your needs, use code SheetShield at checkout to save and to support the pod. That's SHESHIELD at checkout. It does. And first of all, thank you for just essentially giving your lecture here. I'm enjoying this so much. As far as this is all of this information, nearly all of it is new to me. So thank you so much for sharing your wealth of knowledge. I am curious if sexual assault means other things besides rape as well. Is it an umbrella term, or is it just rape?
Rape and sexual assault are the same thing.
Same
rape
thing.
is generally the layman's term, the citizen's term.
Okay.
Sexual assault is the legal term. It involves forced penetration.
Okay. I must be thinking of harassment.
I'm sorry?
Sorry, I must be thinking of sexual harassment, and that's separate.
Yeah, for it to be a sexual assault crime, it has to involve penetration.
Understood.
Of some type of sexual organ or with a sexual part.
Thank you for explaining that.
But rape and sexual assault are the exact same thing.
Rape and sexual assault. Okay.
We just don't, when I write my warrant for sexual assault, I don't call it rape.
I see. Right. That makes sense. And you were going to say something about Texas.
That's the Texas definition. So those definitions can slightly vary from state to state. Isn't that correct, Sherri?
Well, and I didn't really realize that until we did the podcast with your friend, and he said that in Georgia they don't have it on the books yet for men to be sexual assault victims. That's just not how, it's a different crime. They don't have it linked, whereas Texas, male and female are the exact same victim if there's penetration.
I see.
So we have interchangeable male-female victims. I think our laws are actually more updated than I guess Georgia. I didn't know that until he told me that. I couldn't believe. I have a lot of male victims as well. They can be just as victimized.
Of course. And does it change the outcome of the sentencing of the assailant? Is that the correct word?
Not in the least.
It does not. Just because the terminology is different, it doesn't proceed differently. Okay. That's good to know.
Right. No, there's no difference in Texas.
Okay. That's good to know. And yes, that was a really good example. I almost feel like I've heard of that before.
Let's see, an example. Like I said earlier, coercion is the toughest part of human trafficking for people to understand. But a very good example of coercion, which will clear up all the mud, is a case that we had where a single mother convinced her 18-year-old, so again, we don't have the minor part of this, 18 years old, that if she didn't engage in sex with men for money, they would be evicted. They would lose their apartment, have to live in a homeless shelter. She convinced them they would be raped. They would starve. And she withheld food from this girl so she would know what hunger pangs really are. So that is an example. Do you see how she coerced her daughter? And eventually, yes, her daughter did engage in sex while the mom profited, because the daughter was so frightened and under duress of believing that the sole responsibility of keeping her and her mom in a home and fed rested with her. And so that mom legally is a human trafficker. Who knew that?
Not me. And actually, I just realized that I do know I know someone personally who has been put into a very similar situation like that, and she was 19 at the time, and that I'm just mind blown right now. I'm remembering a lot of that, and I'm seeing it differently now. It's interesting.
Now, that doesn't mean there's not a state crime that you can't use. You could, but if you can prove both, the detective obviously wants the federal charge.
Right. Okay.
The way we did it in Fort Worth is we were assigned, when I supervised human trafficking and sex crimes, we were assigned an agent from Homeland Security that was assigned to our unit in Fort Worth, and he got us through the door of federal court. There's always a way around everything, and that's how Fort Worth got around the jurisdiction issue. And so Keith actually worked for me during that stint and for Fort Worth. But he actually was a federal Homeland Security agent. So there's a way around everything.
Right. Absolutely. And I'm sure you've already mentioned this. Are these cases that you've been directly involved with, or are these just case law?
They're cases that are, yes, we worked, and only after they receive a final disposition can I talk about them. So none of this is Tarleton or Tarleton cases, because we just, the one you mentioned earlier is the only one we've actually disposed of with given a final disposition. So once that happens, then yes, they're all public information. But none of this is Tarleton, and the chief makes me make sure that I say that because they're Fort Worth cases and from my Fort Worth experience.
Right.
I don't know why he likes me to add that, but he does.
I see.
So maybe one of these days I'll have some Tarleton cases. Anything sticking out in your head you want kind of better defined or more examples?
Absolutely. So I want to make sure I'm not kicking you off of your stream, because I'm loving how you're presenting all of this. So one thing that I've been seeing on my For You page on especially TikTok, and I honestly think it's just because I'm mostly on TikTok, which is a little embarrassing to admit. But anyway, something that I see a lot is talking heads of, women coming on once they've gotten in their car or once they're home, talking about their experience in a Target or a larger supermarket, and they feel like they've been followed by male or female, that kind of leads me to a question I'd love us to address at some point, which is, are sex traffickers ever female? Which I'm sure they are, but I'd love to hear in what capacity they participate. But these women will talk about how they basically walked around an aisle just like you would if you were driving and you took, 3 right turns, 1, 2, 3, and ended up on the same street. And they've been followed consistently, or they'll go to a female dominant aisle, whether that be for pads or tampons, and the man is still there behind them. And there's been a lot of talk about human trafficking, especially at these stores. Like Target's a big one. Every time I go to Target, I'm like, oh, human trafficking, like watch out. Like it's actually in my head now because of all of the videos I've seen one after the other. So what style would that be if someone were to be put into that situation? And also, I'm kind of rambling here. I didn't prepare this. I don't know if you can tell, but the other thing is that their cars are marked if they're alone, and there are different markings for whether they're, a single female alone. So like the zip ties on the doors, I'm seeing a lot of that kind of flow through my For You page. So what style would that be of forcing someone into, or I guess I shouldn't use the word force, but kind of pushing someone into?
Well, that's what that would be. That would be human trafficking by force.
By force. Okay. I thought so.
You can't.
Okay.
Yes, for sure. There are a lot of signs, a lot of, plastic bags tied to the side mirror, a lot of things. But most human trafficking cases are male traffickers. The problem with the females helping in the ring is some females are definitely in it for the money, and there's no difference. They will do the same thing as a male because it's a profitable business and humans are so reusable. Sometimes we would run into the case where the male trafficker already had a young female in his trafficking ring, and he forced her by duress or threat, or gun, threatened to kill her kids or her parents, into bringing him victims. So then she would go to the bars, or even extending outside her friendship circle, college, she would go where victims were, and she would, for all intents and purposes, be the trafficker. But in reality, you really have to dig deep into those cases to find out why she's doing what she's doing, what her force, fraud, or coercion elements, or maybe there aren't any. But when there's a female involved in trafficking, it's a lot of investigative work that has to be gone into that has to be put into that, because you don't want to arrest someone who has a 3-year-old kid at that house that he's got a gun to.
Sophia, something else is that, kind of what you were talking about in the Target stores or whatever. I mean, I'm not referring to, I don't ever shop at Target. There's not any around here, so I don't have anything bad to say about them. But in reference to victims being targeted, a lot of those also are the motivation there is sexual assault. And Tom Givens tells a very harrowing story about a young lady, a young mother with her teenage daughter being, marked in that same way. They were surveilled. They were followed home. The person that was doing that got in contact with another person. They came over within a few days. They ended up killing all of the family members except the husband. And the husband was actually taking a nap when he was struck on the head by a baseball bat and taken into the basement and tied to the basement, where after that, the assailants, who had been they had a text thread between the two, how they planned to do it, how they found them, how they followed that car, how they identified it, they scoped it out. They were excited. They were talking about it like it was going to be like a big sporting event or a big party. They couldn't wait to do it. And they ended up strangling the mother, and the 2 children, after being raped, were doused in gasoline and set on fire. So there's, maybe more than one motivation for, somebody actually following somebody in there. But it's just sometimes it's best not to try to, figure out what is that person's motivation, but simply know, regardless of that, you may be in danger, and it's maybe worth a little effort if you pick up on those signs to act upon them, to notify, the persons in the store, contact the police, Don't go to your car if you're driving. And like you said, you make those 3 right turns, there's still somebody behind you, to not go home. I think, it's just a good idea for us to like be a little bit more careful how we handle ourselves out in public. And I really think that each and every one of us have probably been, how shall we say, we've been interviewed by people with violent and bad intent. And the majority of the time, we flunk that interview. But if you don't, it could have a very, very tragic ending.
Absolutely. That's a really good point. I think these ladies are kind of just assuming it's sex trafficking because of I think that it's usually a man following a woman. And I think it's kind of easy to go there. And it's also been said so much already on the internet that I think it gets repeated in those circles. But that's a really great point. It's a tragic story of the family. And also, you mentioned a really great point. A lot of these women, they'll see that and then they'll go home and they'll hop on TikTok. I don't hear at least I don't hear that they've reached out to authorities. So, I mean, that's a great message to put out there, anyone listening, if that happens. And I feel encouraged myself to go respond to those videos on TikTok. And luckily I have a decent sized platform. I feel like I could get some reach. So thank you for that.
No, you're very welcome. And, and if you're driving and there's no police department to go to, go to the fire department. Go to the emergency room entrance at the hospital. So, other places where there's somebody there 24/7 that can help you if you need be, but more so probably than anything, just to scare that person off.
Absolutely. Well, the last thing you should do is go home or go to a friend's house.
Right.
What surprises me is I'm a military brat, so I lived overseas my whole childhood. And the first thing that we had to learn with every country we entered, my dad made us learn the route to the American Embassy. From our house, it wasn't the police station. It was always the American Embassy, because overseas, that's your lifeline. So it always surprises me that people don't know where their local police station is. Why don't they? I mean, when you move into your new home, apartment, wherever you're living, drive it. Drive it 3 or 4 different ways. And when you have time, drive to the police department from the grocery store that you use every single week. Drive it from your school. That, to me, that's elementary, but people don't know what they don't know. They have to be told. Learn the police department. Where's your nearest hospital? Where is your nearest 24-hour service? Obviously, if you have a fire department, police department, or a hospital, that's preferred over 7-Eleven. But in the absence of those 3 things being available, where's your nearest 24-hour store? Find out. In that respect, people do need to do their own homework. They do need to map out these routes. And I think that's so important. And that surprises me that people don't know that they never thought about it.
I feel a little called out right now. So I moved into this house about 2 months ago. And now that I'm thinking about it, I don't know where the nearest police department is. I feel so embarrassed, but I'm admitting that, hoping that, someone listening feels encouraged. And also the thing about driving to a fire department, I was actually, when I was dating my now husband, I was being followed. It was so obvious. Like, if this guy, he must have been an amateur, which I thought I was lucky. Also, my dad used to fake follow me home when I was young to see if I noticed him. He would say he was going home and be like, bye, because I'd go to my mom's house. They're divorced. Mm-hmm. And then, 10 minutes later, I'd notice his silver Tahoe behind me. And I'd take those right turns, and I'd call him and be like, are you following me? And he'd be like, I'm so proud of you. Like, you passed today's test. So I'm so glad he did that. And he's a doctor. Like, he has no relationship to law enforcement or military. He just wanted to do that because of the stories he hears in confidence with his patients. But anyway, fast forward, I'm 21. I'm being followed by this green truck. I remember it like it was yesterday. And I didn't know what to do, and I also did not know the local police department location, so I obviously haven't learned from my mistakes.
Well,
But
and you don't know what you don't know.
That's a good point. It's a very good point. I guess we get lessons until we do learn from it. But I pulled into my husband's work, and I was already on the phone with him, and all of his. I'm trying to see if this is okay to say. Yeah. It was a long time ago. It's not who he works with now, but his department, the people that were with him that day was like one other paramedic and 2 EMTs. They were all concealed carrying, actually, except for my guy. So I showed up there. I had them on speaker telling them that I was going to pull in and I needed them to like meet me at my car. And they all 4 came out, and the truck went in the parking lot and then pulled away. That, or I can't remember if he watched from on a top, but it was horrifying. And I'm glad I knew where that paramedic base was. And honestly, no one really knows that building is a paramedic base, but I was lucky to be somewhere with those people. So that's a really great point. It actually worked out for me. So,
one other thing, Sophia, that I kind of encourage, males and females to do is when you go to the gas station, leave all the doors locked except your door, or you can even lock it if you want to. And once you're filling your car, don't just stand there next to your car. Go stand between your car and the front of the storefront. And because it's not uncommon for men to wait for a woman to open the door and get in the car, and then just as she gets in the car, they open the passenger side and get in with her. And that's just another, area where people are pretty much susceptible to being, for lack of a better term, kidnapped and taken elsewhere, whether the motivation of that person was sexual assault or sex trafficking.
And it's great to know.
Really, prevention is everything. Why get gas at 10 p.m.? Why aren't you getting your gas at either 10 a.m. or 5 p.m. in the daylight hours? And there's a lot of stuff that people know. They just don't know that they know. Like if you're shopping and you come out into the parking lot and you see that next to your car is a vehicle, truck, car, whatever, with a guy in it, don't load your groceries on that side. Either wait or load them on the other side. It's basic stuff that people don't know that they know. I mean, when I said that, everyone's going to go, oh, yeah, I knew that.
Right.
I just hadn't thought about it.
Right. Absolutely.
One of Steve's favorite stories, I guess you call it, descriptions, is the ice machine. That's one of his favorites. It's very true. What I tell, we used to give out the book. We learned this theory from Gavin DeBecker. He's an author of a book of how to recognize risk. The Gift of Fear is what it's called. And the ice maker theory is, everyone's experienced this. When you are spending the night at a friend's house, or you've just moved into your new home and you hear the ice in the ice machine in your freezer, it drops into the tray, and it's startling. The first time you hear it, everybody remembers being startled when they heard the ice drop the first time. And you remember how quickly your brain cleared that out and you could go back to doing what you were doing. That moment of fear, that real fear that was there for a second, was quickly cleared out by your brain, because your brain then processed, that's an ice machine and it's no danger to me. But that feeling is what I always try to get people to remember and hang on to. If you're at a party, or you're in a situation in a group, or walking in a stairwell or elevator, wherever you are, you don't get that feeling when you're sitting at home watching TV with your family. other than the ice maker, which is always the first time people remember. That's why I'm sure Gavin used that example. When you are somewhere and you get that feeling, and it obviously isn't an ice maker, there's a reason, because your body, women call it, a lot of women call it intuition. Guys tend to call it gut instinct, but that is such a true thing. Your brain recognizes danger. That little bird, whatever you want to call it, will recognize that you're in danger before you consciously realize you're in danger. So it's almost like our bodies have been given a head start mechanism, but people don't pay attention to that. They disregard it. They say, oh, it's just me. I don't want to be rude. No one here has done anything. When in reality, when you feel that feeling, you need to be leaving. You need to be making other arrangements. You need to be on the phone to help, for someone to help you. You need to go put yourself in a closet, a bathroom, a bedroom, wherever you can lock yourself up until your brain realizes, why are you feeling that? Because chances are you're in danger. You just don't recognize it. And if you ignore it, then you've missed the pre-warning sign. So it's very, very important, for everybody to remember that feeling that I'm describing, because we've all had it. I had a rape case on a male victim who was walking home from Taco Bell in the middle of the night. I think they're open till 2. It was like 2:15. And he heard this man yell at him from across the street, hey, I need some help. And he told me later, I was scared. I said to myself, oh no, I can't do that. I'm scared. But he didn't want to not help someone. So we crossed the street, he got drugged behind a building, and he got raped. 10 months after that case, his parents and his sister were still calling me saying he is still unable to eat solid food. And he knew he had a warning sign. Chances are that man wouldn't have crossed the street and physically drug him across the street. He would have waited for someone else to help him. So if a guy asked me to help him with his car, no. It's okay to be a bitch. We don't really
100%.
owe anybody anything. Certainly
Yes.
not strangers. Certainly not someone that causes us to have that ice maker feeling. And a lot of girls and young women tend to disregard that feeling. Well, once you disregard it, your brain clears that feeling out as the ice maker. So, if people will pay attention to that, you will be alerted and receive a head start to danger. That feeling, that bird, that intuition, whatever you want to call it, will never, ever, ever steer you into danger. It's impossible for it to do that, because its sole purpose is to keep you from harm and to help you recognize it before you're facing it. So everybody remember that ice maker feeling and hold on to that. If you feel it again, there's a reason. And honestly, when you think about it, you don't get that feeling when you're at home with mom watching TV.
Right.
So
Absolutely.
Gavin did a good job using that as the basis for people to remember, hang on to that feeling and act on it. And be a bitch if you have to be.
Amen. I'm thinking back so I listen to a lot of true crime, which I know you mentioned before we talked that you don't, and that makes sense. If I had your job, I probably wouldn't. And I sometimes see it as educational, because they have these segments where, or I guess informative is the word. They have these segments where people will write in their stories and the podcast hosts will read them. And the 2 podcasts I'm thinking of particularly, actually there are 3. It's My Favorite Murder, Morbid Podcast, and Sinisterhood. 3 different podcasts led by women. And other women and men will write in when they have totally disregarded their ice maker feeling and went to help someone, and how they either A, were okay and nothing ever happened, B, something terrible happened, or C, nothing happened to them, but then they found out that person that they helped later on was like Ted Bundy or something. Right. It's always the same story of, I felt bad about this, but I didn't want to be a bad person. I was raised Catholic. I didn't, want them to think I was a bitch. So they end up putting their lives second to the other person's life. So I love that you're talking about this.
All of my victims had that feeling. For whatever reason, they ignored it. They didn't want to be ugly to somebody that at the time wasn't actually doing anything. They just didn't realize. Now everybody listening will realize that's a warning sign.
Yes.
Act. And if you listen to that, chances are, like that boy that crossed the street, he knew not to. I've had so many victims tell me, I knew better. If it crosses your mind, I'm scared, I shouldn't, don't second guess it. Just don't do it.
Absolutely.
It seems easy, but once people know it's easy, I think it's not easy if you don't understand that ice maker feeling, or if you don't understand high risk situations. There's a lot you can do, and the situation will tell you what to do when you have that feeling. If you pay attention to it, you'll figure out how to get out of there. Turn around, walk out the door, whatever you have to do. I've had victims lock themselves in bathrooms until they could get help. So whatever it takes. Everybody, obviously is different. There's as many reactions to these crimes as there are people. So there's no real right or wrong way. In my experience, the rapists that I've interviewed stranger danger rapists, serial rapists, date rapists, acquaintance rapes, all of them. The common factor that my victims tell me is noise. The victims, if they will carry one of those rape whistles, something like that, make a lot of commotion and noise. I've had the suspects I've interviewed say the same thing. They looked for quiet. They looked for easy. They looked for somebody who would abide. They didn't like noise. They didn't like those whistles. They didn't like chaos. They didn't like screaming, yelling, and they looked for easy. And granted, like I said, there are as many different reactions, and your body will tell you how to react to survive. But in my experience, that's what rapists hate.
That's so good to know.
If someone says, get in the car or I'll shoot, fight if you can and take off running. Chances are he's not going to shoot you. He's going to go find an easier victim, somebody who's complying better than you are. Getting in the car and being moved from one location to the other, all that does for law enforcement and for that person is change the location of their death or rape. So getting in a car under a threat rarely works out well. In my experience, you have a better chance doing everything you can do but getting into that car. He is not moving you to a safe location. He's moving you to a location that he's more comfortable with.
Right. So the little devices they're selling, the self-defense kind of, I think one is called Chirp, off the top of my head, that people can use to pull a cord and then it makes a loud sound. Would you recommend those? Of course, they're not probably all created equally.
Every time I see my daughter, first thing I do is look at her keychain, make sure she still has the rape whistle I gave her on there. If she switches keychains, she has a bag of rape whistles.
Amazing.
Yes, Amazing. They do tend to not like chaos and noise. They don't want attention.
Right.
And so knowing that, then the rape whistle is actually a pretty good defense move. Screaming, Wonderful. Yelling, causing as much chaos as you can possibly cause will generally be effective for you. And it will cause him to either run away or move on. Generally. There's no absolutes in this, but generally that's what I see.
Absolutely. That makes sense. Oh, you say there are no absolutes, and then I say absolutely. To your point, though, that's good to know. And I've actually, appreciate that I've heard something along these lines before. Whoever has told me this, or I'm very glad. Of course, I've had more citizen combative training than the average Joe, but that's such a good thing to know. I've heard a lot because the algorithm is so set to self-defense things, people coming on and talking about how, like, never let yourself get taken to a second location.
Never.
I think my worst fear is being held at gunpoint and having to evade getting taken to a second location. I think that idea is very scary, but your point of the fact that they probably don't want to shoot you makes a lot of sense, because they probably don't want you to be their last victim. They want to be able to do what they're doing. So those dots just connected.
Well, one other thing, Sophia, is one, they probably won't shoot you. If they shoot at you, there's a good chance they'll miss you. If they hit you, there's a good chance that it won't be in a place that causes, lifelong, infirmity or kills you. So you're just so much better off just going ahead and just, making a bolt for it, fighting back, again, a lot of these people, they're not looking for a fight. I think, Sherri, you maybe told me one time, I may have imagined this, is that a lot of these rapists, they're cowards. If they have to use a tool like a knife or a gun in order to, intimidate you, they're probably not going to put up a big fight if you try to go ahead and resist them. And even more so, there's a few things you can learn to do martial arts wise that are very effective on persons that don't require a lot of speed or power. And it doesn't really matter how tough that the other person is, things that can just give you that moment of, oh, wow, I can't see for a second. And then that other person is taken off, can really be a lifesaver.
And, crime favors the unprepared. That's just a fact. Crime favors the unprepared. The cases I've seen when the victims fight back, it surprises the suspect because he doesn't expect a fight. Most suspects holding a gun to somebody or a knife expect, get in the car or will work, or I'll stab you or cut you or shoot you, whatever they say. They assume that will work. So they're very surprised. So you've instantly caught them off guard by doing the opposite of what they expected. So prepare. Things that my suspects have told me they looked at or looked for is texting, walking and texting. Don't ever walk across a parking lot or down a sidewalk or across a road or in a store while you're texting. That's what they tell me they look for, because those are very, very easy victims. They're unprepared for what's coming. They don't even see what's coming. So the advantage goes in that situation to the suspect. I wish that me saying that would stop everybody from doing it. It won't. But at least take pause. Don't pull up to the grocery store, open your door, stick your foot out, and sit there and text for 30 minutes. All you're doing is not seeing your suspect while he makes his plan, because he sees you. I'll leave tonight and see somebody texting through the parking lot. If I could stop it, I'd be a billionaire. I'd have the answer, but I don't. But at least maybe somebody will hear this and be walking across the grocery store parking lot and go, you know what? I shouldn't be doing that. And at least slowly, maybe we can make a difference in that respect. Talking on the phone, texting, doing anything that preoccupies you is dangerous. And I know joggers, walkers, they always have to have those headphones, but actually they're very dangerous. My advice would be to just, if you have your phone with you somewhere in a pocket or something, just turn it up. You're safer as far as hearing what's coming behind you or to the side of you if you can hear. And people tend to hear better with their regular phone on with their music rather than those headphones stuck in their ears. So there's a lot of safety things that go on. People just have to decide how much they're going to do and how inconvenient it is for them. People don't tend to do things that are inconvenient, and they roll the dice and look at the odds. How great are their chances? They'll be randomly selected. The one thing in my whole career that has surprised me the most and still surprises me is the randomness of the victim selection. I worked a rape case where the victim did absolutely nothing. 22 nursing student, and did nothing. But the rapist was driving around that parking lot looking for someone that he thought would be an easy target. She walks in, he waits for her. She's there about 15 minutes. She comes out, puts her stuff in a car, and he follows her home. She never sees him. She literally lived half a mile from the place, so she didn't have a lot of time to notice somebody behind her.
Right.
She pulls in, he pulls in. The apartment video solved this case for us, and he was on her before she knew what was coming. He raped her. She and on the curb at the apartment complex, and at 10:30 at night.
Oh my goodness.
So she did nothing wrong.
Right.
But the randomness of that crime has always resonated with me. He was driving through a Walmart, actually, a Walmart parking lot, and she went into the store. So that's one of those, she was unprepared for it. It was night. What could she have done different? She fought the dickens out of him.
Yes.
So
Love
his
that.
criminal act in that respect was very, very short. She was so traumatized. She ended up having to quit nursing school. She moved back to Montana with her parents. Her mom called me, 4 or 5 months later. I'll never forget this, because this is the case that taught me the randomness of sex crimes. Her mom called and said, the other day, my daughter and I were sitting out on the back porch, and I guess in Montana, it's very different than here. The TV and the radio alerted to a mountain lion. That's what they get in their, we get Amber Alert, I guess, or some other alert. They get
Right.
mountain lion alerts. And
Oh.
so the mom said, well, come on in. Let's go in the house. And she said, no, that wild animal can't be any worse than the wild animal I've already met.
Wow.
But that case taught me the randomness. Some crime is random. Most of it is because of a party. Sex crimes is a party or a place that you're at that if you heed all those warnings, you probably can have time to get away from. So that's the good part, is prepare. You can prepare and teach yourself how not to be unprepared to the point that you're selected, whether you know the suspect or not. And in that respect, preparedness is everything.
I see.
So we'll finish up with HT, and then we'll move into sexual assault, because it's really very interesting.
Yes.
So a lot of people think human trafficking is the same as smuggling. It's not. Smuggling involves the transfer or movement of people or documents from one place to the other. That's a lot of misunderstanding in human trafficking is smuggling. They're two very different crimes. A smuggling victim can become a human trafficking victim, but initially the smuggling crime is when the person agrees or pays for that movement. A human trafficking never agrees or never consents. So that's a lot. Human trafficking is not dependent on location. So that always kind of clears up the difference between smuggling and human trafficking.
I see. Okay.
Some quick warning signs to look for. Look for somebody who avoids eye contact. Look for somebody who isn't free to speak, who looks around before they talk. And then those other high risk factors we talked about already. Everybody's a risk, but people are more high risk than others because of those factors. Human trafficking is a difficult crime to file, and from a law enforcement standpoint for a lot of reasons. One is the trauma bond. The human trafficking victim has been taught that she gets to live and gets fed and gets her basic needs provided for because he allows it. So there's a sort of a strange bond that makes her not want to put him in prison. The most difficult one is before the public and the law enforcement in this country were educated to what human trafficking is. A lot of human trafficking victims were arrested for prostitution. Unfortunately, historically, that's true, but now we have taken great strides to correct that. Now, law enforcement, for the most part, understands that. So that mistake often isn't made. Another thing people need to remember is a lot of times the human trafficking victim's only education comes from her abuser or her trafficker. So it's very important that we teach and educate people, because if these victims don't know where to go, then why would they turn in their rapist, their human trafficker? They give a statement, I arrest him, he gets convicted and sentenced, but then what happens to them? They're on the courthouse steps and they realize they have no money, no skills, no life skills, no employment skills. They have no support system, while the prosecutor, the detective, all walk by, shake their hand and say, great, you helped us put a bad guy away today. But then what happens to her? So if she doesn't know or understand that there are services out there that can help her, she walks off those courthouse steps, watch everybody else leave, and then she goes back to either the homelessness or human trafficking. So that you have to educate people. There are services out there. There's a human trafficking hotline. There's financial services, education services. There's all kinds of things that they can go to for help. They don't have to leave the courthouse steps alone. So the legal Texas definition of sexual assault is, we kind of hit on it earlier, but the legal actual wording of sexual assault is any non-consensual, unwanted sexual contact compelled against another person that involves penetration and where the perpetrator knew and or intended to cause harm. So that's the definition of rape. There are 5 general different kinds. There's a lot of different kinds, but 5 most common. There's the lack of consent, which we're not even going to hit on today because there's too many variables for the lack of consent cases. They're truly considered on a case-by-case basis. Basically, for lack of consent, something has to be done or said that causes her to feel like she has no choice. And lack of consent cases are very difficult. I have successfully filed lack of consent cases, but they're very, very isolated in themselves. There's no one lack of consent case that's alike. The other's acquaintance, date, stranger, and serial. What a lot of people don't understand is all those titles do is help us as investigators identify the suspect. The manner and the means and the force or the compelling factor is exactly the same, whether you're a date rape victim or a serial rape victim. Does that make sense? A lot of people don't understand that. The force is the same. The rape elements are the same. That title of date, stranger, serial, or acquaintance just helps us figure out who did it and why, so that we can arrest him and put him into the justice system. A lot of people don't understand that. They think, oh, date rape, he wanted payment for the lobster dinner he just paid for. That's not true. If you're a date rape victim, the same gun, the same knife, the same bodily force, the same compelling factor, strong arm, baseball bat, rope, whatever, that's the same element, and you are just as much of a rape victim as a serial rape victim, even in a date rape situation. That people usually don't understand that till they hear that.
When you talk about consent being a case-by-case situation, do you mean because consent is a lot of hearsay?
No, it's just a difficult element to prove because,
Okay.
yeah, it's a case by case because lack of consent is a difficult element to prove up because generally lack of consent cases involve words, not actions.
Okay.
And so because words is the compelling factor in a lot of lack of consent cases, that's what makes it isolated in itself because you have to show that the words, not actions, is the compelling factor, which is harder to do than a gun or a knife or a rope or bodily force. And so that's why those are difficult cases. And that's usually a podcast in itself.
I see.
But the acquaintance, serial date, and stranger rapists have exactly the same goal in mind. Because remember, sexual assault is motivated by hate, power, or control. They might have different motivations. One guy might go through the trouble of arranging a date to select his victim, where the other might randomly pick her coming out of Walmart. But the goal and their motivation is the same. You're no less a rape victim because you were selected from a date, because that was the way he chooses to select his victims. Does that make sense?
It does.
Surprisingly, a lot of people don't understand the whole date and acquaintance thing. But you're just as raped. You're just as forced. And that's what I always tell Steve is the force, the compelling factor he used is what defines the rape, not how he chose the victim. That kind of always clears it up.
Sherri, if I could add something here, or if I understand this correctly, is in terms of acquaintance rape, it doesn't always mean that the victim really knew who the rapist was. He knew who she was. And a lot of that time may just be because they may know the male that, the boyfriend or the husband of the victim. And so I don't think it always means you knew that person. It just means that there was some connection where they knew who you were. Is that right, Sherri?
Right. Acquaintance just means that before the crime, their paths crossed in some sort of way. And the label in those crimes, as we just said, isn't the factor. Acquaintance usually is. I get a lot of those at a frat party. There'll be 50 people there, and he will see her. They're acquaintances because they were in the same room, but they don't know each other. That's an acquaintance. He saw her and he picked her out because he saw her across a room or walking down a stairwell or something like that. They may have spoken a few words, but they're not friends. It doesn't cross into the threshold of being friends. Saying hi to somebody in a hallway every day for a week doesn't make them a friend. It makes them an acquaintance if that turns into a crime. So that acquaintance is just a very loose label that helps us figure out how to identify this rapist that she doesn't know very well. The suspect ID is obviously easy when she knows them. So the first thing we have to do is figure out how did you cross paths with him so we can solve it and so we can find him.
And you're saying legally that's all processed the same way if the outcome is rape and force was used, right?
Right. The force is the same. It doesn't matter how of that list which way he chose his victim. If you're on a date and he walks you home, you open your door and he bum rushes you in and has a gun in his waistband that he's had all night, you just didn't know it, and he rapes you by gunpoint, you are the exact same victim as if that occurred from a complete stranger. Because the gun is the gun, the force is the force.
Understood.
If it's over a lobster dinner, that would then turn into one of the lack of consent cases. But the force is the force. The gun, the rope, the knife is all the same. It doesn't matter how he picked her. And that kind of shores that up for a lot of people. I hope it makes it make sense to me, but it took me years to learn all this stuff.
Where does the term date rape come into this?
That's not actually even a legal term.
Okay.
That's just a layman's term, a citizen's term for how the rapist chose her.
Understood. Okay.
It's not actually illegal. Acquaintance rape is not a legal term. Date rape is not even a legal term. But
Right.
it sure causes harm to date rape victims because people hear date rape and they think, oh, he must have needed his payback for dinner. And so I think the term date rape causes a lot of harm to true date rape victims because they are in
Absolutely.
reality a rape victim. Does that make sense?
It does.
I think whoever coined that phrase did a lot of harm.
That makes a lot of sense.
We were talking about how rapists don't want to put up a good fight. They don't. They don't want the Good Samaritan to fight the good fight. They don't want the victim to fight. So that's very, very, very important to remember. They don't want witnesses, obstacles, or escape routes for the victim. So always look for those. You want to look for what he doesn't want because he's not looking after your safety. You are. You're the only one sometimes that has to. And I think everybody knows now not to get in the car, to go somewhere else. Fight him. Then at least your next step, your next location will be a hospital because he's going to leave because the cops will start showing up.
Right.
So that's always a good idea. In serial rape cases, the common factor in the cases we worked several true stranger danger serial rape cases completely by random. The common factor in those seemed to be that they were watched. The suspects I interviewed in the stranger danger rape cases we had did admit to watching them at the bagel place, watching them at Dairy Queen, and then following them home and watching their routine for 2 or 3 days and went completely unnoticed. So it's very, very, very important to be aware. Who's watching you? Who's around? If someone shows up and doesn't live there, report it. Report. I always tell people, report it, let us figure it out. But we can't help if we don't know. Be aware. Really, if I had to say it in 2 words, this whole thing, be aware. Or pay attention, either one. Either 2-word phrase really sums it all up. We've had stranger rape cases where he picked her, he hid in a parking lot stairwell, a parking garage stairwell, and thrust her to the floor, bashed the back of her head until he gained compliance. Just kind of watch who's around. If it's possible, get a lot of companies that have parking garages, have security, or they have people that will walk you. If you feel afraid or you get that ice maker feeling, get the heck out of that parking garage, go back into work and ask for an escort or security, or even you can call 911. But I assure you that feeling is there for a reason. So that's always a good idea. In one date rape case we had, he walked her home, he bum rushed her and stabbed her with a knife. That's a sexual assault. The key there really is just don't let them know where you live right away. That's would be my best advice about that. Just don't give away too much too soon.
Absolutely.
What's funny about the rapist is there's a little difference. That's why it's important for the informal label, because it helps us figure out the crime. The stranger rapist will tend to select victims that are alone in the parking garage, in the park, alone at a isolated convenience store. The stranger rapist will tend to select the victim who's alone. So don't get gas at night. If you are getting gas and you feel that feeling and you see somebody approach, leave. Don't even worry about finishing pumping your gas. That feeling is there for a reason. I get a lot of women that say they had that feeling at a gas pump. It's like Steve said, it's one of the most dangerous places there is. The serial rapist will tend to select his victims with sort of a commonality. The serial rapists I've interviewed picked all the victims, all 11 victims had black hair parted in the middle and were small framed because, rapists don't want the good fight. So the serial rapist that I interviewed always picked that kind of small frame, tiny little girl that he didn't think could put up much of a fight. So fool them, trick them, learn how to defend yourself, learn pressure points, learn how to get a gun away from somebody. I mean, it can be done. It doesn't matter how big or little you are. There's somebody bigger than everybody. I had a lieutenant tell me one time after we had gotten into a fight on a domestic, he said, "Wow, I'm 62 years old and you just now showed me it's not the size of the man in the fight, it's the size of the fight in the man." Like, okay, good.
Yeah,
I'm glad
absolutely.
I could. But years later I remembered that, and it was always true. There's somebody bigger than all of us. You are 5'2" and weigh 100 pounds. Take a self-defense class. Learn. It's all about pressure points. It's not actually about brute strength all the time. It's about pressure points and where to know to hit. So take a class. It will be well worth it.
Absolutely.
The acquaintance rapist tends to look for, like Steve said, that opportunity, the girl at the party or the girl at the bar. An acquaintance rape would also be somebody talking 15 minutes, buying a drink for a girl at a bar. That would be labeled acquaintance rape. They had a little bit of interaction before the actual crime. As like the Walmart girl, there was no interaction. So that's kind of the difference. So really be prepared. Rapists will stalk you. So pay attention. They will watch you. They know that you don't see them, but they see you. So they know they have the advantage there. But if you pay attention, you're not on your phone, then you can kind of gain back some of the advantages. And remember, every crime has its own motivation. Sexual assault, I learned early on, and I don't tell this story very often, but it is a gripping story. It's very short. I interviewed a rape suspect and who was a former Marine, kind of with it kind of guy. And actually he was an officer. He was an officer. I mean, there's 5% of officers that are corrupt and will commit crimes or wrongdoing. There's 5% in every job. 95% of the officers in this country are doing exactly what they're supposed to do, the right thing all the time. But there is 5% you have to deal with. 2% are the actual criminals. The other 3% are generally work misconduct type things. But I interviewed this officer who his thing was he was oppressing the prostitutes. And if a prostitute ever told me she was a rape victim, I set up and I took notice, because those prostitutes don't lie. They don't want me in their lives. So if they tell me they're a rape victim, that they generally are. They take a lot before they'll report it to the police, because they know what will happen. I'll nose around and kind of disrupt their life. But this particular officer would stop these prostitutes in the middle of the night, and he would always say, "Get in the car, or I will make up something to put you in jail." And this one prostitute did come forward, and I took her complaint, and I interviewed him. And I said, "Michael, why do you have to oppress prostitutes? You can go to any bar." And see, this was my misunderstanding early on. I said, "You can go to any bar that you want to in this city and get willing sex. Why do you have to force this prostitute and lie and scare her and oppress her?" And he looked me straight in the face and he said, "It's not about sex. It's about hate. And I hated my mother growing up, and I never thought I could hate anybody more. And then I married it." That's what he told me. And I knew instantly I was in the presence of evil. And that's the first thing I realized. The second thing I realized is rape has absolutely nothing to do with sex. It's hate, power, and control. All three or one of those. It's not financially motivated, and contrary to a lot of people's belief, it is not sexually motivated. A lot of serial rapists have wives and girlfriends at home.
I've
It's not
noticed that
sex.
on the true crime podcast, they'll always, it's always like a big wow factor, but now it's become kind of like, okay, yeah, that's another one bites the dust kind of thing. Cause it's from these stories that are at least told on the podcast, which they don't just do the Ted Bundys of the world. They do, they'll do local crimes, or people will write in and say, hey, no one's ever heard of this crime. Will you cover it? And that has been a reoccurring aspect of it. That's very interesting. The wives also often don't know, right? It's like very hidden. Okay.
No. These rapists have their public life and they have their secret life.
Jeez.
And really, they say they've got the public life, the work life. They even go so far as to say the personal life with their wife, girlfriend, kids, and then their secret life. So, yeah, very seldom do people know. Yeah, it's a crazy world. Just you have to live in it. You have to prepare yourself, and you have to pay attention to it. Really, that's it in a nutshell right there. Pay attention.
Do these rapists open up to you once they've been convicted, or do they open up to you even beforehand?
Very seldom do I interview the rapist once he's incarcerated and once he's been sentenced. Normally, they talk to me when I show up with a warrant for their DNA, and they know they're a suspect, and it takes a lot of different training. It takes a lot of different staying ahead, knowing what to say when one thing doesn't work with them. But that's what interrogation training does. So I never, in my Fort Worth experience, had a rape suspect not talk to me. A lot of times they just think they're smarter than I am, and they try. A lot of times they think they can talk their way out of it, but that's all interrogation skills and techniques. You figure out what works, and you have your toolbox full of these techniques, so something will always work. Yeah, it's very interesting, the suspects, what they have told me over the years. But they're the ones that told me they don't like the noise, the chaos. So we know that's true. They're the ones that told me the randomness of it, how they select their victims. So we know that's true. They're the ones that said they look for victims with devices, whatever it may be, phone, whatever they're paying attention to other than their surroundings. Yeah, it's a lot to take in. Human trafficking and sexual assault is a lot to take in at one time. I think we pretty much went over the court cases. That kind of shores it up. We went over the definitions. We went over what detectives need to proceed with those cases, other than lack of consent, and that's its own different arena. There's really, for someone to have to soak all this up, there's really not a lot else for the first time. I think that do you have anything else, Steve, that I don't want to confuse people too much? It's a lot.
I think you've done a great job. You've got a lot of information out. The one thing I would like to add is that if you do see something that suggests sex trafficking is taking place, you can contact the National Human Trafficking Hotline. That number is 888-373-7888. Again, that's 888-373-7888. And you can also text them at 233-733. Again, 233-733. So there are things that we can do that can, maybe put a dent in this. And certainly if something was happening to someone that we loved and cared about, we'd want someone to do that for them.
Absolutely. Thank you for sharing that. And I will also have that number in the show notes for anyone that wants to add that to their contacts. I may not know where my police department is, but I have their number saved in my phone in my favorites. So
Yeah.
I've accidentally called them a few times trying to just call my mom about like a chicken recipe, but it happens. If you're interested in adding that to your phone, you can copy and paste it from the show notes below. I'll have that there for you, along with just while we're on that topic, along with the contact, and at least information of Steve. I think, Sherri, if people say someone listened to this episode and they were interested in interviewing you themselves, or they had a particular question, is that something you would be open to kind of participating in, or do you just recommend that they contact their local authorities for things like that?
No, that will be just fine. They can have my work email. You have it.
Yes,
you can put it on there.
Sure
Not
thing.
I
will.
Not this one, but the work one.
You got it. I feel special that
That's
I have this
fine.
one, but
They can ask whatever they want. I'll answer.
Sure thing.
I mean, knowledge is everything. Most people want to help. They just need to sometimes be told how.
Absolutely.
And I'm sure a lot of people will have questions, and because it's so much. So I can clear up, a specific question they have, or if they wonder whether they should report something, I can kind of lead them in the right direction there. I'll try.
Absolutely. I'll go ahead and share your work email in the show notes as well if someone wants to reach out about that. We haven't talked about this much, and if you have a moment, I'd love to hear your thoughts on concealed carry for women's self-protection. And even though I'm 5'10" and I'm around 180 pounds, around there, got a lot of muscle, I still carry a concealed carry firearm with me in the majority of places, and I think it's a force equalizer. It's why I,
of course,
started this podcast. But as far as any experience you've had where a concealed carry firearm was used in a situation where a woman was being attacked in any of those situations, is that something you've come into contact with?
I have not had a case where a victim stopped being a victim because she had a weapon. But why wouldn't you? If the law allows it, why wouldn't you want to protect yourself? I don't.
Absolutely.
I don't ever go without mine, ever. If it's either on me or in my purse. I don't understand if someone has the opportunity to kind of level the playing field and not become someone's victim, why they wouldn't want to take every measure necessary. I guess there are people that just aren't going to carry guns for whatever reason. That's fine, but at least arm yourself with something. If you
Absolutely.
if you just cannot bring yourself to carry a gun for whatever reason, you don't think you're skilled, you just don't like guns. I guess there are probably a few people that just aren't going to do it. Learn self-defense and take some classes. If you aren't sure of your gun skills, go take a class. You'll be surprised at how well you probably will shoot. I can shoot 100.
I love it.
And not even try.
Yeah.
I was devastated one time I shot a 97. Oh, man.
Yeah.
Practice, and guns, like anything else, it's a perishable skill. If you do not practice, you will lose that skill.
Yes,
so
as a competition shooter, I agree.
Sofia, in regard to your question, I have done a number of podcasts with Sean Vincent and Don West. Don West was George Zimmerman's attorney in the Trayvon Martin shooting. I don't know. Maybe I've done 30 or 40 podcasts with him. Those can be found in the news link at ccwsafe.com. And in two of those podcasts, we discuss cases where a female successfully defended herself, one against a home invader and another from a rapist. Both of them used a firearm and used it successfully. And there's quite a bit of information. As a matter of fact, there's a lot of really, really good articles there on that news link that are written by a myriad of really good firearm trainers or other experts on self-defense, including the legal side of it and everything. So there's a lot of information out there, and I'm a huge advocate of carrying a concealed handgun anytime you can. I'm even a greater advocate of going out and taking a one or more defensive firearm classes from someone that really knows how to use that in a defensive situation as opposed to a recreational situation where you're just going out to the range. There's a big difference between fighting for your life and fighting smart and knowing when to use that gun, when to threaten to use that gun, and when not to. I'm also a big advocate of women. This is true for men, but especially women, of carrying small fixed blades somewhere on your body. There's a number of designs, very small knives that women can actually clip to the strap between the cups on a bra, and have that ability to, if you find yourself in that situation, to have just the being cool enough to wait for your opportunity, and then once you get your hands on that knife, your objective there is to not kill them. Your objective is to stop them. And in most instances, especially with rapists, when you start cutting on them anywhere and leaving their DNA all over the scene, they tend to lose the thought of their enthusiasm.
It's true. They don't like
Wonderful.
a fight, and they don't like chaos. So
Absolutely.
why wouldn't you create that?
Exactly. And you make a wonderful point, and I'm not an expert matter on this, but when I was greatly humbled at ECQC with Craig Douglas,
Yes, ma'am.
weapons-based entanglement and how very little marksmanship mattered, and how ground, grappling, the practice of the knowledge base of force escalation, and also the recognizing pre-assault cues and the verbal de-escalation part, how much all of that mattered so much more in those sims than my marksmanship did. My marksmanship wasn't good, so I was kind of glad it didn't matter. But that's why I started USPSA and competition shooting, because I wanted to get better at that. But that is such a good point. And the fixed blades, that's becoming, I think, more popular. Maybe I'm just seeing it more, but I have a friend, Kristen, the Healthy Buffalo. That's her kind of training company. She's trying to get more women to train with fixed blades, kind of like Craig Douglas's Edged Weapon Overview, and knife control concepts by Aaron Giannetti and Eli Knight, and instructors like that are very, very practical about knife application, and not just the kind of like the Bowie knife principles taught by Krav Maga. Not to say that that's not important to learn, and I'm not trying to say anything negative about that. I think that's important too, but kind of bringing a more modern and concealable perspective to knife fighting. So I love that you brought that up. And of course, pepper spray is a really good one. POM pepper spray is the one that I've really been trying to shout out, just because of their stream pattern. So absolutely, I'm happy to hear that I have the support, and the listeners have the support of investing in weapons to help equal the playing field by you two. That's very important. So thank you for sharing that.
That was well said,
Thank
Steve.
you, ma'am.
Yes, it was. Absolutely. And Steve, I'd love to just have you on as well and go into more about what you do on another episode, unless that's something you're wanting to talk about today.
No, that would be fun. Another time would be awesome.
Okay. No worries at all. Well, we'll just have to do that. And is there anything else either one of you wanted to share today before we end the episode, or anything you would like to send the listeners off with?
I definitely would. Much of the stuff that we are telling people that are willing to carry a gun, carry OC, or carry a knife or whatever is applicable to people that don't want to do that. A big part of not getting entangled in a deadly force encounter is awareness followed by alertness, and making those decisions that I will act upon whatever nonverbal cues I'm getting that indicate to me that this situation there's something wrong about it. And one of the biggest things we can almost always do is start moving. And so wherever you are, move to a better location if that's possible. If someone is starting to follow you, go in another direction, which means that if they want to go ahead and intercept you, they have to change their path so that they can. So you can, as they say, disambiguate the situation, and then you can act accordingly. And that ability to use your voice, nonverbal and verbal skills are very, very important. And I really would, encourage our listeners, if they haven't already acquainted themselves with what Craig Douglas, Cecil Birch, Paul Sharp, Chris Fry, some of those others, kind of in that Shifts Works collection teach, you really owe it to yourself to do that, because it is life-changing. And I'm sure Chet probably talked a little bit about that when he was on that podcast, which now that I know about it, I've got to make that maybe my next listen.
Wonderful. Yes, Steve is talking about the episode with Chet Palumbo on self-defense law. That was an incredible episode. Yes, please, if you haven't listened to that, go check that out as well. It'd be a good follow-up to this episode. So
yes, ma'am.
Thank you,
You're
Steve.
very welcome.
And Sherri, is there anything you would like to send the listeners off with?
Just remember, crime favors the unprepared. Prepare yourself. Learn how to protect yourself. It sounds simple. I know it's not, but that's a start.
Absolutely. Yes. Thank you so much. This has been such an eye-opening episode. I'm borderline embarrassed I didn't know a lot of this, but I'm so happy that I know it now, and I'll be listening back to this as a listener, and I'm probably kicking myself at this point for not asking certain questions. So if that happens, I'd love to have you back on one day, especially if I get a lot of feedback from listeners on things that, they want to hear more about. It would be an honor to have you back on, both of you back on.
Of course.
Thank you. Okay.
Sounds good.
Good night.
Thank you so much. And for those interested in exclusive video content, you can become a Patreon. You'll receive a thank you note and podcast stickers and more exclusive content. You can visit She Shield on Instagram and TikTok at She Shield Pod. All resources mentioned are in the show notes, which are the notes just below the podcast. Just scroll down and click show notes. If you like the podcast, you can help by liking, subscribing, and leaving a review. And if you or anyone you know is a firearms owner experiencing a crisis, look into holdmyguns.org. They are an organization dedicated to connecting you with a local gun shop or FFL to store your firearm for you until you're ready to take it back. The link to access their website and to find a storage location or partner is available in the show notes as well. Thank you for listening, and in the meantime, stay safe and stay vigilant. Are you ready to step up your shooting game? Introducing Walkers Incorporated, the pioneers in ear protection for shooting, hunting, and commercial applications. For over 25 years, Walkers has been revolutionizing the industry, ensuring your hearing safety and enhancing your shooting experience. Anytime I'm on the range, indoor or outdoor, I use Walkers ear protection to have crystal clear communication with my fellow shooters. I currently use the Silencer 2.0s and the Razor Slims for my range adventures. Not only does Walkers protect your hearing, but they also protect you. Being able to communicate with others on the range is vital to personal safety. You shouldn't have to sacrifice your safety when the ultimate goal is for overall better self-protection. With Walkers, you'll experience unparalleled comfort, unmatched innovation, and the industry standard in shooting ear protection. Never settle for anything less when it comes to your safety and enjoyment on the range. You can save on Walker's ear protection and support the podcast by using code SHESHIELD. That's SHESHIELD at checkout.